Recently, I prepared for and passed my qualifying exams for my PhD program in curriculum and instruction at the Florida Atlantic University, which is located in Boca Raton, Florida. I've been a student in this program for quite a while. Summer 2013, I enrolled in coursework for the first time, and then I completed coursework in summer of 2019, at which point I then enrolled in one directed independent study credit so that I could retain my student status while preparing for my qualifying exams. I work full time, so I really felt like it would be too much for me to take classes and take exams in summer 2019. And that's why I decided to solely focus on studying for the fall of 2019. So, with the exams, the way it works is that you have 8 total questions that you study for, and your advisor picks for the day of or the 2 days of that you will answer. So you'll have 3 hours each day for a total of 6 hours to answer a total of 4 questions, but you study for 8. So roughly an hour and a half to answer each question from memory. So you pick 4 curriculum, policy, and pedagogy questions from the doctoral handbook. You also pick 2 methods questions, and then you and your advisor collaboratively create 2 area specialization questions. For me, these were within the areas of grit theory, K through 12 leadership, teacher professional learning or professional development, as well as EdTech integration. Those were broadly my main focus and my main interests in the tail end of my PhD program. So here are my questions. These are the 2 curriculum ones, and I'll show you the pedagogy and policy one that I selected. The one I ended up getting is this one right here, where I had to identify 3 scholars, and each of them had to be central to my own beliefs about curriculum theory. And then I had to answer one of those bullets, and I chose to answer how did each scholar address the issue of what content should be included in the curriculum, as well as, of course, what relevance do those ideas have for curriculum in contemporary context. But I also studied for the second one where it talks about, identifying the school of thought that you most associate yourself with as a scholar. What I did is I actually wrote up a response to all 8 questions, and it was several pages long, which I then condensed into a 1 to 2 page study guide version of that response. I then recorded myself in podcast like fashion and repeatedly listened to myself over and over again. And for each question, I created an infographic. So this is the infographic I created for the curriculum question that I ended up getting. As you can see, I have the 3 scholars, the years of their seminal works, and then we have kind of a summary of each of their theories, very brief because this is based on I already know what I'm talking about from my narrative that I wrote up. And then this is like my infographic so I can visualize it. And then we have the second part of it, which is how it's appropriate for today's curriculum context. Other questions that I had, I studied for this pedagogy one and then this policy one. I ended up getting the pedagogy question about teacher learning and teacher professional development, where I had to describe the literature and methods for affecting change in teacher practices, as well as propose a framework for effective professional development in a school context. So this was actually a pretty creative question, and you kind of can answer it however you want, as long as you answer the question fully and completely. The pedagogy one for the infographic look like this. So it's a little bit more involved. As you can see, I have all of these effective professional learning elements that I pulled from the research literature. And then I have more research that I cite within each of these, as well as in my framework that I create. My questions on methodology were these. These are the ones I studied for, and I'm more of a qualitative researcher, so I stayed away from the more quantitative questions that I could have picked. So the one I ended up getting was this one right here, number 1. I had to describe how I plan to conduct my dissertation research, which of course I haven't proposed yet, but this actually helped me in writing my proposal. The fact that I had to go back and look at the case study, grounded theory, ethnography, narrative, and phenomenological designs really made me connect and reconnect with everything I had learned, and even I had to relearn some of it because I had been in the program for 6 years. So here's what the study guide looked like for my methods question that I ended up getting. As you can see, I wrote the question, and then, like I said, I wrote up an entire response that I then condensed. And this is really the condensed version. So here's my research question and proposed methodology that I plan to use. My justification involves major authors. So Yin is a major case study research author. And then I have further citations that I used. And then I have the section on alternative approaches, which includes what I would do if I had a grounded theory, ethnographic, narrative, or phenomenological design. And this was actually a really great experience because I really saw why I needed to do a case study. I mean, I kind of already had in my mind I would do one because it seemed most appropriate, but now I can actually go through each of these other designs and really elaborate on why that would not work for the questions I'm trying to answer. And that's exactly what I do in the rationale. So the study guide is about 2 pages, but when I actually wrote this out in my exam time, it was probably closer to a 5 to maybe 6 page response. Double spaced, but still quite a little bit longer because you really elaborate on it. And then if you go back here, we can see my slide where I really visualize how I would respond to this. So I covered my my written, my visual, my auditory. I was just using all my learning styles. Because remember, I did my actual outline, my study guide, I did my infographic, and I recorded myself and listened to myself over and over again. These are my area of specialization questions, and the one I ended up getting is this first one. How does the theory and practice of grit impact individuals across contexts, academics, career, socially? So it was pretty involved, even though it's sort of a short question, as you can see right here. Have the theory and practice of grit. Then I really go into depth of what that is, even some of like the formulas that would be used to represent it. And then I go into grit's impact within children and adults across different contexts, including academic, social, and career. And then even I go into how it's used today in terms of sometimes in university studies. So like when people interview for graduate programs or practitioners in medical fields. So it's a relatively new topic, but as you can see, I do go into pretty significant detail here. And then my infographic looks like this. So really a lot of information, but the fact that I did the narrative condenses to a study guide, then did the infographic for each one while I listened to my sort of podcast of my study guides, it really, really helped me. So how did I do? This is the rubric that I received back, so I passed. And I definitely studied a lot. I think it would average an hour and a half to 2 hours every day. When I got closer, probably for the last week and a half to 2 weeks, I listened to my self-recorded podcast of these narratives over and over and over and over. So that helped a lot too. As you can see, I passed each one, passed one with honors, and then this one I wanted to specifically talk about, the one on curriculum. I kind of like barely passed that one because if you remember from the beginning, my study guide and my infographic weren't as detailed as my other ones. So they were still pretty good, and obviously I passed, so I had enough detail, but I definitely could have done better. So if you look at this one as opposed to the one I got the highest honors on, which was this pedagogy one, I had a lot more detail in this one. Either way, though, it's fine because if you pass, you pass, and that's great. That's all you really need to do. But if you shoot for passing with honors, who knows? Maybe you'll pass all of them with honors. Study tips that I wanted to share. First of all, I've been in this program for 6 years now, and so things I did my first 2 years aren't exactly fresh in my memory. So I actually redid the research into major authors and theorists, and I did not rely on work that I completed throughout my different courses because a lot has changed over the years, and a lot has changed for me as a researcher and my beliefs and what I'm interested in. So things that I did research on like my first or second year, I kind of don't really care so much about that anymore, and I've evolved to other things. I also, like I said, typed a multi-page response narrative to every question. I then asked my advisor to look it over and give me feedback. And based on that feedback, I condensed it into the most relevant points so that when I printed it out, it didn't take up so much space and I could kind of more visualize it more concisely. I also recorded myself reading each response, and I must have listened to my responses for 100 or more hours cumulatively. So in addition to the study guides, the infographics, I had those self-made podcasts that I listened to in the gym, in the car. I travel for work now, so literally like on my way to the airport, on the airplane, in the airport, like anytime I could. During my lunch breaks, all the time. And then, of course, the infographics, I use Google Slides just because I'm also really a visual learner, and this helped me visualize my response as I was sitting in a small room with a laptop that only has Microsoft Word on it, and I only have the question that I'm answering and a piece of scrap paper. So it really helped me to have all of those different study formats over the past 2 months prior to taking the exams, because then I had a lot more to jump off from. Finally, exam taking tips. Here are my tips. Everyone is different, but for me, I would emphasize do not stress on the day of the exam. On the day of the exam, the 2 days, you've had 2 months to study and you're either going to pass or fail. And if you fail, you'll get an opportunity to retake the questions that you do fail. So it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's definitely not ideal, but if you think, oh, well, I can pass 3 of the 4 questions, great. Then you only have to worry about one. Preferably you pass all 4, but you never know. But don't stress because it is what it is. Also, I outlined my responses and then kind of built those outlines out as I was answering each question. I reread my responses a couple of times and I rephrased different things, corrected some minor grammatical mistakes, and just really kind of sounded it out to myself before I turned it in. Something I did on the second day that I wish I did a little bit more of on my first day is that I bolded, underlined, or italicized headings in important terms so that my committee could really go through it and they can more easily see what I know and really kind of visualize all the learning that has taken place. So that's what I've done. I did pass, and this is what worked for me, but you never, everyone's different. So hopefully you guys also have a good way to study and hopefully you do well as well. But like I said, don't stress. It's not the end of the world. If you have to retake a question, just do your best and good luck.